there's now information that a major state has reached out to the asset manager Bitwise to see if it's possible to offload US Treasury bonds and use that to buy Bitcoin ETFs. That changes the whole game of Bitcoin by 180 degrees. Because suddenly, it's not just small investors calling up the asset manager saying, hey, can I buy Bitcoin here, 2021? No, now the big players are calling Putin, Trump, you name it. All the big names are reaching out to asset managers to buy Bitcoin ETFs. We'll also take a look at which state this could be, because this is highly relevant for the Bitcoin price. Because when small people buy Bitcoin here, it pumps the Bitcoin price up a bit. When companies buy Bitcoin, it pumps the Bitcoin price even higher. But if nation-states start buying Bitcoin, it could cause a big impact. Many speculate this cycle is the nation-state FOMO. Also, Russia announced the mining demand is 3 times higher than last year. A lot of people are still speculating that this cycle will be the big nation-state FOMO cycle. But we also have information that it's been announced from Russia that the mining demand is 3 times higher than last year. This is also highly relevant because it indicates that global Bitcoin nation adoption is progressing further. And now we have, for the first time, more than a 50% probability on the betting markets that a strategic Bitcoin reserve is coming. And that's what I've been telling you about for the past few days. And for the first time, we now have more than a 50% probability on the betting markets that a strategic Bitcoin reserve is coming. And that's what I've been telling you about for the past few days. Every day, the facts and data pointing to a strategic Bitcoin reserve are piling up. So we have more and more things like that some executive orders are being leaked that are apparently set to be introduced right at Trump's inauguration. Then there are some leaks confirming better regulations here. Then there's the meeting with Michael Saylor and Donald Trump. And so you could go through a whole list of how every day there are new clues suggesting that the probability is getting higher and higher. And now it seems like the market is starting to price this in, or at least showing it on the betting markets. We can also take a fresh look at how things are shaping up here. We have a 35% chance that the Bitcoin reserve will come in the first 100 days. We have a 50% chance that the Bitcoin reserve will come in 2025. And we have a 57% chance that the Bitcoin reserve will arrive before January 1st, 2026. 2026 is when it's expected to come. This means that we can clearly see that the market estimates that the further we go into the future, the more likely it is that there will be a Bitcoin reserve here. And if we go even further, then the probability will probably rise to over 30% by the year 2000, let's say 80, 90% or something like that, I would imagine. Because in the end, that's exactly what you have to understand. A US president will eventually introduce a Bitcoin reserve. Bitcoin demands adaptation. Major countries are considering Bitcoin. At some point, someone in the US is going to take the presidency and introduce a strategic Bitcoin reserve because you just can't ignore reality. Bitcoin is a technology that, just like the internet, the automobile, and electric light, simply can't be overlooked. You have to adapt. And now we're really seeing the unthinkable happen, showing that it's not just small investors buying Bitcoin anymore. The big players, major countries are considering Bitcoin allocations. We also know that more and more countries are presenting various Bitcoin reserve strategy acts and so on. And now the unthinkable is happening, which really shows that it is not just small investors who are buying Bitcoin, but the really big fish, big countries are considering Bitcoin allocations. We also know that more and more countries are presenting various Bitcoin reserve strategy acts and so on. And now we actually have confirmation from the Bitwise CEO, who says that they just provided some information about Bitcoin ETFs to a nation state. They're considering shifting part of the investment in foreign currency government bonds to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is starting a new chapter here, he says. So they're considering whether to actually sell off government bonds, which obviously don't have a positive real return, and where you're basically losing money every year because a government bond just can't keep up with inflation. And now they're considering whether to sell off small portions of these foreign government bonds and buy Bitcoin with that. And now we need to see who this candidate could be, because there's a lot of speculation going on, especially in the comments below. We already have confirmation that a nation state, whether it's big or small, I'd say nation states are usually big because they're always large buyers. That means even if we E.G, if you have a country like El Salvador, which, let's say, is relatively small on the international stage, it's still a big buyer for Bitcoin because El Salvador can create a very significant buying pressure compared to the average buyer. So El Salvador bought 6,000 Bitcoin. That's not huge, but compared to someone who's just doing, I don't know, a $100 dollar cost average, El Salvador is definitely a big buyer here. And that's what I mean, because we really have different candidates now. First of all, it's important to note that it has to be someone who sells their foreign government bonds, and there are, for example, a whole lot of players. For example, China is massively dumping US Treasury bonds, and other countries, for example. Russia would also be a candidate here, for example. They can't really hold US Treasury bonds anymore because they would be sanctioned and stuff like that. And more people are realizing, okay, hey, government bonds can be censored. Secondly, they see that they don't have a positive real return. And thirdly, they're noticing, hey, with Bitcoin, I have some big advantages. For example, also countries like the United Arab Emirates, where there's speculation that they've been buying Bitcoin for a long time and seem to be continuously stacking it in the background. There was another article that CZ posted, and then there were lots and lots of rumors. He also said at the Bitcoin Men conference that the United Arab Emirates have already bought Bitcoin. If they've done that, then they'll probably keep stacking more because there are a few people who just buy Bitcoin once and call it a day. They usually try to accumulate even more Bitcoin. I can't imagine it being the US. I just don't see them calling Bitwise. If anything, they'd probably go to BlackRock because I think the connection between BlackRock and the US is the strongest. But what's also important is that it has to be some nation state that still has at least a bit of trust in the U.S. So that might rule Russia out again because, for example, El Salvador has all of its Bitcoin in self-custody, which means they have hosted it here on their own hardware solutions. And now, if you take the Bitcoin ETF variant here, then you are again dependent on the USA because the USA could censor Bitcoin at any time. So, to be really honest, it was actually a dumb idea, especially with Russia. They probably won't go for it because Russia wouldn't want Bitcoin ETFs in the US since they could be confiscated at any moment. That means countries like, for example, the US or maybe even China, which aren't in such a good position with the US, will likely build their own infrastructure instead of jumping into a Bitcoin ETF honeypot where they could end up being censored again, giving up all the advantages of self-custody. I also always recommend a TREZOR hardware wallet. I'll give you a link below where you can easily keep your Bitcoin in your own custody without any third-party risk. You can also get 10% off when you buy one of these hardware wallets with the code BitcoinHotel. And what's likely to happen more and more over the next 2, 3, 4, or 5 years is exactly what's shown in this tweet from the Bitwise CEO. People will sell their bonds and put that money into Bitcoin. It's going to be a really big movement. This means that we are now really in a new era where bonds have simply outlived their usefulness. Of course, it still makes sense for some big investors, etc. But to be honest, a bond has kind of become a scam in the current interest rate environment if you can't even maintain your purchasing power. And why invest if you cannot maintain your purchasing power? And bonds are usually held long-term, not just short-term, but often for the long haul, like 20 years. So if you have a long-term horizon, why not just go straight into Bitcoin? You can easily outperform inflation here. And if you have a long-term horizon, why not just jump straight into Bitcoin? Here, you can easily outperform inflation. And then there's actually a report from Russia that's also really interesting. According to the local media company Prime, the demand for industrial Bitcoin mining equipment in Russia has tripled compared to last year. So we definitely have more demand for Bitcoin mining in Russia, and that could come from various sources. It could be that private individuals mean 2001, but it could also be that there are companies working for Russia or something like that to do Bitcoin mining here so that Russia can simply line its pockets. There's actually been a bit of a loosening in Russia regarding Bitcoin, allowing it for international trading, like international settlement stuff and all that. Then there was the story about the finance minister who basically said that international trading in Bitcoin for cross-border payments is already happening. Putin also mentioned that Bitcoin can't be stopped. So it fits nicely into Russia's agenda that we're now seeing reports about ramping up mining and selling more mining hardware. This also means that the hardware will eventually get hooked up because when you buy mining equipment, you're not just going to leave it sitting in the basement, you're going to connect it sooner or later. This is exactly what I discussed with Max Kaiser, who keeps saying, hey, the Bitcoin price isn't that relevant. Look at the hash rate. If the hash rate keeps rising, we're in a super cycle. When we look at the Bitcoin hash rate, it just keeps climbing. Even during the bear market, it's been on the rise. The hash rate is going up because Bitcoin miners are the risk takers in the network. If they keep pushing it higher, that's a really good sign that the network is healthy. We see people in the Bitcoin network taking on significant risks, and the biggest risk takers are the Bitcoin miners. As long as they're willing to bet on Bitcoin, it shows they believe in it. That adoption is continuing, and that the Bitcoin network remains very well secured. This is ultimately a very healthy metric we're seeing. But it also suggests that nation-states might be secretly engaging in Bitcoin mining behind the scenes. Because ultimately, a rising hash rate during a bear market can lead to people mining at a loss, meaning they're actually losing money on their mining operations. Yet, they still prefer to mine Bitcoin rather than buy it on exchanges, since they can acquire Bitcoin anonymously without having to disclose their positions. And that's really important to prevent any nation-state FOMO from happening, because what Bitwise and others are doing is putting this information out there. That's exactly what a nation-state wants to prevent, because they want to buy low, not high. And if everyone knows, for example, the United Arab Emirates, if they officially confirm they have Bitcoin, that would send a massive signal to the market, triggering a FOMO and pushing the price even higher, making it harder to accumulate Bitcoin. And now we actually need to go back to the Bitwise CEO, who made a pretty bold statement. He says that there won't be enough Bitcoin for everyone who wants it, obviously, but it's worth taking a moment to think about it. So think about it, not every person in the world can own a whole Bitcoin if we have 8 billion people. And then it also says down here, hey, wait a minute, if there are 21 million Bitcoins but 8 billion people, how can everyone have a whole Bitcoin? So think about it, not every person in the world can own a whole Bitcoin if we have 8 billion people. And then it also says down here, hey, wait a minute, if there are 21 million Bitcoins but 8 billion people, how can everyone have a whole Bitcoin? Then the answer is pretty straightforward. It's not possible for everyone to have a whole Bitcoin. It's not even possible for every millionaire in the world to own a whole Bitcoin. And that really makes it clear why nation-states need to buy up Bitcoin massively now, because not every nation in the world can create large Bitcoin bags. I mean, there's just a limit to it. I mean, I don't know, how many countries are there? Like 250, 300 countries or something. And let's say a large country wants at least maybe, I don't know, a few 100,000 Bitcoin. I mean, if we were living in a Bitcoin standard, then Bitcoin would definitely be a status symbol. You could really see a country's strength reflected in how much Bitcoin it holds. And if the US has, I don't know, 1 million Bitcoins, then there might not be much left for other countries. Because for a country, it's not just about having one Bitcoin. It really starts to matter when you're talking about holding a significant amount of Bitcoin. And if you're below that threshold, you're basically completely irrelevant, more or less. And that's why it's so important to really understand this statement. For the individual, of course, one Bitcoin is crazy here, and yes, not everyone will be able to have a Bitcoin, so congratulations to all of you who have already got that far. But for lenders, it is even more relevant, because for lenders, the number of Bitcoins that are relevant here is much, much higher. It's not about having a whole Bitcoin, it's more about having some Bitcoin, maybe just a little bit. But hey, if you want to buy Bitcoin now, I'll drop a link below to 21 Bitcoin, where you can easily purchase Bitcoin. Sure, simple, there are savings plans, there are auto wallet transfers, there are limit orders. It is really suitable for beginners, but also for advanced traders. And here, with the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can still get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. I'm signing off now, catch you later, peace out.